It's strange how we go through life thinking we know who we are, only to realize at some point that we have no idea. That's exactly what happened to me. I always thought I was confident, that I had a solid sense of self, but it wasn't until I reached the age of 23 that I truly began to understand who I was, what I wanted, and where I was going. Let me take you back a few years to when I was 22. I had just graduated from college, and I thought I had everything figured out. I had a degree in hand, my friends were getting jobs, and there was this general expectation that I was supposed to have my life together. But what no one tells you after graduation is that it's okay to not have everything figured out. We get so caught up in the idea that we need to have our lives mapped out, and when we don't, we think we failed. But in reality, life doesn't work that way. For the first time in my life, I felt completely lost. I didn't know what career I wanted to pursue. I didn't feel the same drive I once had. And most of all, I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. I spent months trying to find that thing that would make me feel like I had purpose, like I had direction. I looked at my friends, all of them getting jobs, moving forward with their lives, and it made me feel even more unsure of myself. I tried everything. I sent out applications to dozens of companies, convinced that the first job I landed would be the one to turn my life around. I took courses, attended networking events, and even tried to learn new skills. But all of this felt empty. Every time I was on the job hunt or working on something, I could feel this constant weight on my chest. It wasn't just the uncertainty about the future. It was the pressure I was placing on myself to have it all figured out right away. It wasn't until one evening, after yet another disappointing interview, that I had a conversation with my mother that shifted my entire perspective. She looked at me with this calm understanding, and she said something I'll never forget. It's okay not to have everything figured out right now. It's okay to take your time. That was the turning point for me. I realized that I had been pushing myself too hard, trying to meet an expectation that wasn't even mine. The world tells us that we have to know what we want by a certain age, but life isn't a race, and there's no one-size-fits-all timeline. I stopped pressuring myself to get it right immediately. I began exploring things that truly interested me. Instead of focusing solely on finding a job for the sake of having one, I focused on what made me happy. I took up painting again, something I had loved doing as a child but had abandoned for years. I started journaling every night, not to write about my frustrations or fears, but to reflect on my growth and the small victories I had every day. Through this journey of self-discovery, I learned something incredibly important. Growth doesn't always look like forward movement. Sometimes it looks like taking a step back, pausing and reassessing. It looks like letting go of the pressure to be perfect and allowing yourself the space to evolve. The next year, I started to see changes in myself. I wasn't rushing into anything anymore. I wasn't forcing myself into a mold that didn't fit. I was following what felt right, even if it didn't make sense to others. I found work that inspired me, not because it was the highest paying or most prestigious, but because it gave me the opportunity to grow and learn. Looking back at that time, I realize now that everything I went through, the uncertainty, the feeling of being lost, was exactly what I needed to shape who I am today. It was during that year that I learned to trust my instincts and listen to my heart instead of constantly seeking validation from outside sources. I'm now 25, and while I still don't have everything figured out, I am confident in the direction I'm heading. I've learned that it's okay to not have everything figured out at once, that it's okay to make mistakes, and that the most important thing is to be true to yourself. The road to self-discovery is never linear, and that's what makes it so beautiful. My advice to anyone who feels uncertain or lost is this: take your time. Don't let society's expectations define you. Your journey is uniquely yours, and there's no rush to get there. Focus on growth, not perfection. Explore, learn, and be patient with yourself. You are exactly where you need to be, even if you can't see it right now. And above all, trust that the answers will come, not when you force them, but when you allow yourself the space to discover them. As I started to embrace the pace of my own journey, I noticed the small shifts within me. It was almost as though the pressure I had placed on myself to constantly do something was slowly being replaced by an inner peace, one that allowed me to be rather than do. And in the quiet moments of reflection, I found clarity. At the age of 23, I started to understand something I hadn't understood before. Life is about the journey, not the destination. It's about the lessons we learn along the way, the mistakes we make, and how we grow from them. For the longest time, I was obsessed with reaching a certain goal. I thought that once I achieved the right job or made the right amount of money, I would have it all figured out. I thought that my worth was tied to my achievements, that my success was defined by the titles I held or the money I made. But I was wrong. The truth is, success isn't a destination, it's a state of mind. It's about finding peace with where you are in life, even if it's not exactly where you thought you'd be. And I realized that the most successful people aren't necessarily the ones with the most accolades. They're the ones who are content with themselves, who understand that every step, even the missteps, has value. I remember one particular evening when I was sitting by the window in my small apartment, watching the rain fall. It was one of those rare, quiet moments when I felt like the world had slowed down just enough for me to hear my thoughts clearly. For the first time in a long time, I was at peace with where I was. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't comparing myself to anyone else. I was just grateful for the journey that had brought me here. And in that moment, I realized that I had learned to trust myself. Over the next year, I continued to find joy in the little things. I spent time with people who made me feel alive, who celebrated my successes, but more importantly, who supported me through my failures. I learned that true relationships aren't about perfection, they're about authenticity. I stopped trying to fit into boxes that weren't meant for me. Instead, I started to make choices based on what felt right for me, whether that was in my personal life, my career, or my health. Through my experiences, I also began to understand the power of saying no. For years, I had been a people pleaser. I wanted to make everyone happy, even if it meant sacrificing my own well-being. I thought that saying yes to everything and everyone would make me a better person. But in reality, it only drained me. I didn't have the energy to invest in the things that truly mattered to me. The moment I learned the power of saying no was life-changing. It allowed me to set boundaries, to protect my time, and most importantly, it helped me take ownership of my own life. Saying no didn't make me selfish. It made me wise. It allowed me to focus on the things that brought me joy and fulfillment, rather than spreading myself too thin and losing sight of my own values. One of the most significant lessons I learned was the importance of failure. Growing up, I was terrified of failure. I thought it was something to be avoided at all costs, a sign of weakness or incompetence. But as I entered my mid-20s, I realized that failure is not the enemy, it's the teacher. Every time I stumbled, I learned something new. Each failure became a stepping stone toward a better version of myself. I learned that failure doesn't define you, it refines you. I began to embrace my mistakes with grace rather than shame. I started seeing them as opportunities for growth, not as setbacks. And through this, I developed a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. It wasn't that the failures didn't hurt, they did. But I learned how to rise from them, stronger and wiser each time. As I turned 24, I found myself taking risks that I wouldn't have dared to take just a year prior. I applied for jobs that once seemed out of my reach, not because I thought I was guaranteed to get them, but because I knew I was worthy of trying. I stopped waiting for permission to pursue my dreams. I started speaking my truth, even when it was uncomfortable, even when I feared judgment. I understood that my voice mattered, that my dreams were worth pursuing, and that I didn't need anyone else's validation to move forward. I learned that happiness isn't something that is handed to you. It's something you cultivate. It comes from the inside out. The more I took responsibility for my own happiness, the more I realized that it wasn't tied to external circumstances. It was about being in alignment with who I truly was and accepting myself as I am, flaws and all. When I stopped waiting for someone else to make me happy, I began to create joy within myself. I started doing things that nourished my soul, whether it was reading a good book, hiking in nature, or spending time with loved ones. These simple moments became the foundation of my happiness. By the time I was 25, I was no longer the same person I had been just a few years earlier. I had become someone who trusted her instincts, who understood the importance of balance, and who knew that life was a journey, not a race. I had learned that I didn't have to have all the answers right now. It was okay to be a work in progress. It was okay to change my mind, to evolve, and to try new things. I had learned that growth doesn't happen overnight, but rather it unfolds over time, with patience, intention, and self-compassion. And perhaps the most valuable lesson I learned was this: the best investment you can make is in yourself. Your self-worth doesn't come from what you do, but from who you are. Your value is inherent and no one can take that away from you. The more I focused on my own growth, the more I attracted positivity, abundance, and love into my life. The more I believed in myself, the more the world around me reflected that belief. So if you're reading this and you feel lost, unsure, or uncertain about your future, know that you are not alone. It's okay to not have everything figured out. It's okay to take time to discover who you are and what you want. Don't rush. Don't compare yourself to others. Trust your journey and know that every step, every stumble, and every triumph is part of your story. Embrace the unknown and know that it's leading you exactly where you need to go. I can't promise that the road ahead will always be easy or straight, but I can promise that it will be worth it. The lessons you learn along the way will shape you, and you'll become stronger, wiser, and more confident in the process. And when you look back, you'll realize that every challenge was an opportunity to grow into the person you were always meant to be. As the years passed, I started to notice how different I was from the person I had been at 22. I had learned to shed the weight of societal expectations, to embrace uncertainty, and most importantly, to let go of the perfectionism that had once held me hostage. It was liberating in ways I can't even describe, but this didn't come easily. There were still moments, many moments, when self-doubt crept in. It wasn't that I was free of fear or that I had figured everything out. It's just that I learned how to live alongside those fears without letting them control me. I began to understand that fear is not an enemy to be avoided, but a signal, a sign that we're pushing ourselves towards something that matters. I remember one particularly challenging period just after turning 25. I had spent the year focusing on self-improvement, and I felt proud of how far I had come. But there was one lingering fear that I couldn't shake: the fear of failure. I had worked hard to establish myself professionally and personally, but what if it all fell apart? What if all my efforts were for nothing? These thoughts haunted me, especially at night when my mind would race with all the worst-case scenarios. But one thing I had learned through my journey was that growth happens when you face your fears, not run from them. I realized that my fear of failure was not a reflection of my abilities or worth. It was simply a part of being human. Every successful person I admired had their own fears, but they didn't let those fears stop them. Instead, they used them as fuel to keep going. So I took a deep breath and leaned into my fear. I started applying for jobs that once seemed too far out of reach. I pitched ideas to clients that I would have previously been too intimidated to present. I reached out to people who could help me take the next steps in my career. And while things didn't always work out as I had hoped, I learned something valuable. Each step forward, no matter how small, was a victory in itself. There were also times when I faced setbacks. I was rejected from jobs I was excited about. I faced criticism that stung, and I made mistakes that cost me time and energy. But every setback taught me resilience. I began to see failure not as something to be ashamed of, but as a part of my growth process. The key was to rise after each fall, to learn and to keep moving forward. One of the biggest turning points in my life came when I decided to stop seeking approval from others. For so much of my life, I had been driven by external validation. I wanted to be liked, admired, and accepted. I thought that if I met everyone else's expectations, I would finally be enough. But the more I tried to meet those expectations, the more I lost sight of who I really was. It wasn't until I began to embrace my own values, my own vision for my life, that I truly started to feel free. I stopped worrying about what others thought of me, stopped trying to meet standards that weren't mine, and instead focused on the things that made me happy. I found comfort in my own company, and I no longer needed validation from others to feel secure in who I was. I learned to appreciate the quiet moments, those moments when I was alone, reflecting on my thoughts, my progress, and my journey. It wasn't about being isolated. It was about learning to be content in solitude. I had always been afraid of being alone, thinking that it meant something was wrong with me, but in reality, being alone allowed me to discover my true desires and passions. I started reading books that inspired me, taking time to meditate, and pursuing hobbies that fueled my creativity. Those moments of solitude weren't lonely at all. They were empowering. Around this time, I also realized the importance of surrounding myself with the right people. The friends I had in my life were those who not only supported me, but also challenged me to be better. They celebrated my successes, but more importantly, they were there for me during my failures. I started to distance myself from those who drained my energy, who didn't respect my boundaries, and who weren't aligned with my values. I understood that the people you surround yourself with can either lift you up or bring you down, and I chose to surround myself with those who brought out the best in me. And then there was love. I had been in relationships before, but none that were truly fulfilling. I had often mistaken the idea of love for dependency, thinking that I needed someone to complete me. But over the years, I learned that love isn't about finding someone to make you feel whole. It's about growing together with someone who respects, challenges, and compliments you. I learned that love, at its core, is a partnership built on trust, mutual respect, and shared values. At 25, I was in a healthy, loving relationship. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was based on honesty, communication, and shared goals. I had learned to love myself first, which allowed me to love another person in a much more authentic and fulfilling way. I no longer depended on someone else for my happiness. Instead, we were building a future together, supporting each other's dreams and working as a team. The lessons I learned during my self-discovery journey were transformative. I came to understand that self-love and self-respect are the foundation of every successful relationship, whether with others or with yourself. I learned that personal growth doesn't come from external achievements, but from within. It comes from facing your fears, embracing your mistakes, and committing to your own happiness. Looking back at my journey, I realize how far I've come. The girl who once felt lost, uncertain, and overwhelmed has transformed into a woman who is confident, self-assured, and clear on her values. I still have much to learn, but I now see challenges as opportunities to grow, rather than obstacles to avoid. I trust the process of life, knowing that the journey is as important as the destination. To anyone out there feeling uncertain, overwhelmed, or lost, I want you to know that it's okay. You are not alone. You don't have to have everything figured out right away. Life is a process, and each step, no matter how small, is a victory. Keep going. Trust yourself, embrace your journey, and know that you are exactly where you need to be. And always remember, the best investment you can make is in yourself. Your worth is not defined by external achievements or others' opinions. Your value is inherent, and you have the power to shape your own path. Don't rush it. Allow yourself the time to grow, and trust that everything will unfold in its own time. Final thoughts. As I look back at the person I was just a few years ago, I can't help but feel grateful for the struggles, the fears, and the lessons. They've shaped me into someone I am proud to be, and I'm excited to continue on this journey of self-discovery. My story is still unfolding, and I'm ready for whatever comes next.